How is everything at LanzaJet?
You guys hear me okay? This is a tough spot to be in terms of middle of the afternoon after lunch, and my body clock is on midnight Chicago time still. So
You're welcome.
yeah, thank you. So hopefully we'll make this interesting enough for folks. Things at LanzaJet, I would say really well. I'd like to say great, right? But it's tough. You just heard about a lot of uncertainty in the global market. And I think that's something that is very true just across the world, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk, no matter which aspect of the SAF industry you look at. But for us as a company, things are going really well, broadening our scope commercially across the globe, doing a lot of good work. And we'll talk about Freedom Pines, I'm sure, here in a little bit.
Well, that was my next point. I was going to start at home in the US. So
Yeah.
how's the sort of startup process, everything at Freedom Pines been going? Because that's your major sort of venture in the US market.
Yeah, good. Just to show of hands, just to get some folks maybe awakened a little bit, who's familiar with Freedom Pines? Good, some good recognition.
Hopefully everyone in your team put their hand up.
Yeah, I think my team is well aware. They're living it. Freedom Pines is the world's first ethanol to SAF plant. And it is the first commercial deployment of our technology. Let's do another show of hands. Who here has deployed technology at a commercial scale for the first time? Okay, fewer hands went up. It's hard. It's hard to do that, right? It doesn't matter if it's the first time you're deploying it or if it's actually the nth time. Even the nth plants have challenges as we're going through startup. The good news for us is that as a technology developer, we made the choice that we would develop our own commercial plant. So we are essentially de-risking it for anyone who licenses the technology from us. Traditionally, what technology developers do is they do the designs, they run pilot plants, they may have a demo plant, and then they sell that technology to someone who's going to deploy it commercially, and that customer takes on that commercial risk. We've taken on that risk. We are de-risking the technology. The really good news is the technology is actually working really, really well. We've had some equipment issues that have set us back. We've had a compressor issue. We've had some issue with poor manufacturing of trays. These are things I look back on and wish we would have discovered earlier on. But sometimes you don't until you apply the heat and the pressure and you move along in the system far enough to see the issues develop. So Freedom Pines for us is going along really well. Lots of lessons learned. It's doing exactly what we wanted it to do, which is it's a commercial demonstration unit. So we are de-risking it for anyone else that we partner with and that we work with across the globe. On top of that, what I will also share with you is it's been a great experience for our team. Starting up a plant, shutting down a plant, starting up a plant again, and shutting it down many times. That builds terrific operational chops, as we say in the US, in terms of running and operating a plant safely. We also had a hurricane that came through in September, took us out for 6 weeks. The plant had no damage, but the community had no water, no power, no utilities servicing our plant for 6 weeks. So we had to come back up from that and had to shut down pretty urgently leading up to that hurricane. So it's been a terrific learning experience for the team. Great for us because we're de-risking the technology. And in a SAF industry, in a world where you have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk on policy, on demand, on consumers willing to pay a premium, and a lot of technology risk, I'm actually really glad that we made the choice to develop this facility to de-risk the technology.
So you're dealing with literal headwinds as well as the metaphorical headwinds that the industry's got.
Yes, absolutely.
How have people, when you're discussing your partnerships, when you're obviously talking about your technology licensing around the world, how's their sort of engagement been with Freedom Pines, and how's that been able as a platform to be able to help build those partnerships?
Yeah, it's been good. Our philosophy generally around partnerships is we go deep on partnerships, right? They're not superficial. If you look at our investors, they are phenomenal companies. I'll just rattle a few of them off, right? We've got Shell, we've got British Airways, IAG, Microsoft, Breakthrough Energy, Suncor. I'm sure I'm forgetting others, right? There's about 10 of them. They're great, great companies. They've not only invested in us and given us the financial wherewithal to do what we're doing, but they're also partners in other ways, right? We work with Mitsui, who's one of our investors, on ethanol. for our plant in Georgia, right? They trade a lot of ethanol globally. They're a great partner to have in the supply chain. We work with Shell on scaling up our technology. So every one of them plays a role, not just in the financial support that they've provided, but also in enabling us to scale our technology and expand our global footprint. So partnerships for us are much more than just a name on a paper or dollars coming into the company in that case. With our customers, that's the same thing, right? We go deep on our relationships with our customers. We have them out to the plant in Georgia. We walk them through it. We share very openly and transparently the lessons learned. We factor that back into their engineering work, right? So they have an improved plan from us. That is how we do our business, and that has resonated, to be honest, quite well, especially being open, honest, transparent about where we are, the improvements that we see ahead.
Is that the key to building those strong relationships? Because this is a relationship business, that sort of deep-rooted and transparent communication.
Especially in this industry that is fraught with uncertainty, right? I don't know how many times I can say that myself, but I've heard it from others today. And someone made the point earlier, right? There is no conductor telling us how to do this across the globe, right? There's no one that's sort of keeping an eye on which moves next, right? What action happens next, and someone orchestrating it all. That doesn't happen, right? So, you rely on partnerships, and we do in particular, to help us take risk off the table and ensure that we're working together across the entire supply chain to build this industry and to build our company.
Do you just want to remind people where your partnerships are, where you're looking at currently building projects beyond the US?
Yeah, so we have an important project here. It's called Project Speedbird. It is being done for British Airways, IAG. So that project is actually progressing at pace. It's a great project up in Teesside, so great location for us, and I'm excited about it, right, in general. We have activity in India. It's a very active market for us, so a lot of activity in India. We've licensed our technology to Mitsui and Cosmo Oil, which is Japan's third largest refiner in Japan. So building an ethanol to SAF plant in Japan. We've got several projects in Australia, one in New Zealand, and even one in Kazakhstan, right? So a lot of activity across the global map and for different reasons. And we're also doubling down on the United States, right? So a lot of activity in the US as well.
Do you just pick places for plants that you want to go on holiday to?
Yeah, well said. I don't know about Kazakhstan, right? I have not visited Kazakhstan yet, but I hear it's a great place. These are all great locations for different reasons, right? So we oftentimes, especially in Europe and the UK, talk about climate as the driving force. It's not always about climate. For us, as an ethanol feedstock starting point, think about the impact that has on the ethanol producers in Europe and in the UK potentially. As road transport electrifies, you have the ability to shift existing ethanol production to support aviation. The problem is that you can't do that in the UK and in the EU because first generation ethanol is not allowed under the schemes. In a place like the United States, that is allowed. In a place like India and Japan, that is allowed. So for different reasons, right? In Australia, there's a strong interest in economic development, rural development, and national security and energy security. Just not that long ago, maybe about a month ago, Chinese were doing live fire drills between Australia and New Zealand, right? There's always a threat of supply chain disruption of crude oil coming into Australia or fuel coming into Australia. So different reasons, I guess, I would say, right, for different countries in terms of why they do it.
You mentioned about supply chain and managing that. How closely do you monitor? Do you like speaking with ethanol producers and manage that supply chain? Is that something you're constantly monitoring across the locations where you're active, not just where you've got your commercial facility? Yeah,
very active globally, right? So we do that directly as well as we leverage some of the relationships that we have with others.
And it's something that came up in the previous panel about the ethanol, the trade deal with the US and the UK and the ethanol, specifically the ethanol aspect of that. How, obviously you've got a project here, you've got a project in the US. Is that what's your sort of thoughts and feelings in response to that?
Yeah, so here's a little bit of irony maybe that we can talk about, right? So people here are familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, right? Some folks are. There's a tax credit called 45Z. We've actually been successful in the big, beautiful bill, as it's called, coming out of the House. The 45Z has actually survived, right? And if anything, we've actually extended it. So good news on that front. Bad news is that it's actually banned foreign feedstocks. So the impetus there is to use U.S. domestic feedstock. The problem for an ethanol to SAF pathway is that there actually, in the United States today, there is no approved pathway for U.S. ethanol. The only approved pathway in the U.S. is Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, which is a pathway that we hold, right? On top of that, U.S. ethanol actually in today's world would not qualify under the U.S. incentive scheme and for the tax credit, right? So what do we then do, right? The left hand is not talking to the right hand, even within our own country, in terms of orchestrating this in a way that makes it productive, right? That's a challenge, if you will, in general, in terms of how do we make sure that we're not creating a bigger problem for us in general for the industry? How do we make things easier rather than harder? Right? So now we have to have a lot more discussion around, you're sabotaging a market instead of encouraging a market to develop based on the way that this is unfolding in the U.S. On top of that, U.S. ethanol now qualifies for the same tax credit. So all of a sudden now my input cost is going to be higher, and that opportunity cost is going to be passed on to me. So when I'm processing that ethanol, which I have to do to create the SAF, I then lose value. Right? So that too doesn't then work the way that this has been structured. So even in my own country, right, where we can double down on ethanol to SAF, the ethanol community is very much in favor of the SAF market. The way this is unfolding currently as it's being tossed over to the Senate is actually challenged, right? So we can do better than that in terms of thinking through what the implications are, right, as we're making these decisions.
But thankfully, you're not just ethanol restricted. You've got the SAF aspect of what your technology provides sort of gives you another sort of handle that you can use on the tiller, as it were. So do you just want to explain how that sort of relates into what your technology is capable of?
Yeah, so we think of, I think most folks think of A to J as ethanol to SAF, right? Which is what it technically is, ethanol to SAF. The beauty actually is you can make ethanol from just about any waste stream. And we partner up with other companies, and including our sister company, LanzaJet, which has a technology that takes waste carbon, whether that's MSW, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and converts that into ethanol using gas fermentation in a bacteria that they've proven at commercial scale with 6 operating facilities globally. Right? So the ethanol to SAF technology is actually a platform technology that can leverage any waste stream, convert that to ethanol, and from ethanol to SAF. Here in the UK, we're also working with Nova Pangea Technologies, which takes woody waste, converts that into ethanol, and from ethanol we take it to SAF. So there are many ways for us to use a raw material, convert it to ethanol, and from ethanol to SAF. So when we look at the market, we don't look at it as just where is the ethanol available, but in some cases, how do we actually create that ethanol, right? Is it a PTL play that is more relevant? Then how do we take carbon dioxide, add hydrogen to it to create the ethanol, which we can do, and have proven to do that on a commercial scale.
Someone in the audience has asked a question about the Project Dragon that was in Port Talbot, and obviously there's been some conversations about that. Do you have any sort of clear that up for people, just sort of what's going on there, the situation with that?
So I wish I could. I shouldn't, because that's a LanzaTech project. We're LanzaJet, so we're 2 independent companies, honestly. We share a name because that's where things started, but we're independent companies who oftentimes work together. We've licensed our technology to LanzaTech for the Dragon project. That's probably all I can say.
Fair enough, we'll leave it there. Does anyone have any questions in the audience for Jimmy? No, not so much. So in terms of, we're going to go into Project Speedbird tomorrow in sort of great detail. Obviously that project's got partnerships with Nova Pangea. How much does sort of the partnering and implementing different areas of technology into what you've got in terms of your technology change the picture and sort of the conversations you need to have with investors? Because obviously the more you change a process, the less de-risked you can to justify it to an investor. So does that actually significantly change the conversations, or are you sort of able to explain the tangible differences when you're looking at other sort of adding on different bits?
Yeah, so I think it's always important to take risk off the table, right? And I think for us as a company that has our technology from ethanol to SAF, we tend to want to focus on ethanol to SAF and allocating the risk just to that part of the process, if you will. We've got a great relationship with Nova Pangea. They're on their own sort of timeline and horizon for deploying their technology and developing and producing fuels. We also are securing ethanol from other providers because our timeline may be a little bit different than what Nova Pangea's timeline may be in terms of the volume that we need, right? So on any project, we oftentimes look to take risk off the table, right, wherever we can. And in some cases, we're developing projects where they're a tolling arrangement, right, which becomes a lot more interesting and attractive to investors when others are taking on the commodity risk for both the feedstock and the offtake.
Someone's asked a question on Slido about how much HJ SAF has been produced in Georgia so far. Do you have a number off the top of your head, or do you have?
Yeah, not yet, right? So we are finishing up our startup, and we will be, target is producing in August of this year. So we actually took a step back in terms of making some changes and modifications to equipment and this compressor, which I've talked about several times. We're making those improvements right now as we speak, and then starting back up again here in July. So I expect us to be fully operational in August, is the plan. And you know, our technology partner on that is Technip Energies, and I think I saw Technip was here earlier today. There we go. Have been a phenomenal partner for us, not just on that project, but we work with them globally, right? The reach of Technip cuts through to 35 plus countries. So we work together across the spectrum, right, if you will, on deploying the technology. We use the Technip solution called Hummingbird to get from ethanol to ethylene, which has actually performed extremely well at the site. We've been operating the plant for 6,000 hours, right? So a lot of really good data that's informed some of the changes that we needed to make.
Do you just like names with wings? You got dragons and speedbirds and firefly and hummingbirds and all these names are just wings, sort of thing.
You know, we are in an industry, right, that does like to fly. And that's an important piece here, right? We want to maintain the industry's ability to fly. And I think we sometimes, in some countries, right, there's this inertia to say, let's just cut down on flying, but that's not going to happen. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that cutting down flying is the answer, right? The answer is, how do we do this more sustainably? In places like India and China, where you have the middle and lower classes now beginning to travel via air, you're going to see strong demand in that part of the world for flight. And the rest of the world, right, we rely on it. We really do. And we saw what happened during COVID when things shut down. It does bring communities together, families together, and enables commerce, right? There's no doubting that.
On liking flying, someone's asked about how many offtake agreements have you signed now?
Yeah, so for me, offtake is not what we shoot for. And I heard the discussion earlier in terms of the importance of that. I get the importance of that. I think you hear a lot of buzz in the industry about offtake agreements being signed left and right. Those are all great. You need a plant to deliver on that, and we don't have enough plants being built against those offtake agreements. For Freedom Pines, 100% of our fuel is spoken for, with take-or-pay agreements for the next 10 years, right? So we had that as part of the deal, if you will, in getting Freedom Pines up and running. So you need that. There's no question about it. But we're not in the business of just signing offtake agreements for the sake of showcasing demand that frankly falls flat if you don't have the production flowing and you don't get the facilities built.
And one final thought to leave the audience with: what is the one lesson you'd give the room for the plant startup and the challenges that's had? What's sort of one takeaway you want the room to take from your experience?
Yeah, I think we underestimated how some of the common things would cause a problem, right? So the technology that we worried the most about actually is not the issue at all. The catalysts, the reactions are all doing exactly what they're supposed to do, working exactly as intended. The fact that we have heat exchangers failing on us, a compressor failing on us, grid designs that were not made at the right tolerance is extremely frustrating. So if you're going down that path, spend that extra effort around quality control, quality management as you're working your way through the manufacturing process of the equipment even. Make sure you have the proper controls on that. And don't underestimate how these little things can cause disruption, right? We're ordering a valve right now, and a valve is taking 12 weeks to receive. So that's the kind of stuff that then adds to your time horizon for getting the plant restarted again, and it's just a valve, right?
Jimmy, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Pleasure. Thank you.